From the first volume, For Everything That Is Pointless and Perfect, the title poem. Find a sky emptied of cloud, and a home where voices have turned to powder. Delete laughter. There are the birds and their languages of feathers, brushing fence lines of light, like a boy running his finger along a suburban picket until he finds a gap, hoping to glimpse a secret garden. Some have buried boredom and consigned their passion for laziness to old suitcases with tin handles in attics. Eventually touch will disappear, along with the catch of a splinter, longings for lost love, and everything that is pointless and perfect. Belief has become the glow of a screen resting in our hands, the stained glass window of a digital cathedral lit by a dead sun. And the next one is Stillness is leaking from stone and concrete. Whether night or day, life seems stalled at 4 a.m. Somewhere a church bell is ringing as if the world has cast off the spell of lockdown. I once gave a family a jigsaw puzzle to pass the time, and now wonder if they ever discovered it was missing a single piece of sky. Across the city, an old man is watching that piece of sky slide from the landscape on his curtains, while next door 2 lovers have become the map makers of their bodies. Stillness is leaking from stone and concrete into the streets, so each pool of reflection is a duplicate earth emptied of humanity. Most of the voices we know have turned to dust and breadcrumbs, snaring sunlight on the floorboards of empty hallways. Slowly, nature is making a temporary comeback of clarity and vengeance, until each minute is missing a second and each hour a minute. Eventually, all those seconds and minutes will add to something that is neither night nor day, something closer to the prick of a ticking clock in darkness, marking the moment we cast off this spell. And once again, the streets will fill with the languages and laughter of countries returning to blindness. Angels were arguing. When it eventually arrived, some said we had spent too many years writing the same words over the writing on the wall. That night I dreamt of Sleeping Beauty, spinning wheels, and a single bead of blood on a fingertip. For 100 years the earth thrived, the butcher's knife rusted, rats forgot the taste of poison, and whales sang across whole oceans. Far off, angels were arguing who should announce pestilence to the world. It started as a tickle at the back of the throat as someone waved a feather at the opposite end of the globe. Meaning took flight and found a new tree, where flocks of nations were roosting in the ignorance of a world taking cover. Within a few weeks' worth of presidents' speeches, distance and maps became irrelevant. A new season arrived in body bags and body counts to fairy tale villages of stone and olive oil. Cities masked themselves, scratched the belly of the beast and waited for it to sneeze death. Screens were wiped, graphs curved, and counters ticked, accurate as atomic clocks. Towns emptied and hospitals brimmed, politicians placed their bets. Doctors and nurses had no time to place their bets. Far off, angels were arguing who should die next. My son was conscripted. This Stephen's experience in the army is something which features regularly in his poetry. On the last night, after 2 days of gales, I dreamt my son was conscripted. Every part of his childhood was being ushered to a bus. On the morning of his leaving, I stood at his door and traced the broadness of his shoulders, a man's frame scaffolding a boy's heart. Overnight, I had become my father, watching my son fade to a war of another father's making. Now he too was joining history's shuffle to war, as if packing off on a summer holiday, tennis rackets, guitars and pillows, stuffed with the whispers of mothers, still made weightless by childhood. But these are things not on the list sent by the army. The dream poured a cup of gravel down my throat. and somewhere inside me an unknown fuel delighted in burning away my son's presence. Somewhere inside my wife a dam was about to flood a valley. It would drown us all. And then a shorter, considerably shorter poem, and Stephen is one of those people who does short poems exquisitely well. A child's laughter is like a handful of cutlery. A child's laughter is like a handful of cutlery carried to the table of all the people who have loved, or watching sparks of sunlit memory trickling over mossed stones. Map for Adolescence. All of his books are dedicated to his wife and his 2 children, who provide him, he says, with all the inspiration for his work. Map for Adolescence. Part of me is navigating a new country that is my son. Topographies, contours, waypoints, all strung with muscle and sinew in the proximity of manhood. What was gradual became an alien geography overnight, requiring updated maps, storm gear, and compass needles that ignored magnetic Earth. Always swinging towards quests fraught with risk and insurrection. Having been a father of an adolescent boy myself, I know how true all of that is. And then the final one from this volume is one of his 3 instances of Clifton Forth Beach, one of those nature poems of liquid and light that Corinna talked about. The boy explained that the bumblebee had run out of fuel and crash-landed in the sea, into a fish-scaled sea, into the muted Nautilus light, all thanks to a simple navigation error and a sun made of one-way glass. When the tide returned the bumblebee, the ocean had polished its head, thorax, and abdomen to oily pearlescence. 6 locked limbs licked to blue-black, and although chipped and ragged in places, its wings were still infused with Gothic translucence. Every aspect of life tucked neatly away, as if all it required was the turning of a key, the coiling of a hair-fine spring to recall flight and give movement to its shellac body, now sealed in a Tupperware container. All around, a ballet of cormorants, dogs, and flirting couples continued. And then from this, the new volume, of which there were only 5 printed for this event. So when Stephen wins the Nobel Prize one day, this is going to be worth a lot of money. The Thief is on page 2, which I will get to eventually. Why are there so many pre-pages before you get to the poetry? You need to fix that design.
He's the designer.
Bad design, yeah.
Yeah, bad design. This is a poem that goes back to a memory of childhood. There was the thuggery of his desk, its pine weight and rivers of wood grain running beneath last year's exam papers, roughed up textbooks and snapped rulers. In the corner of his office, a basket of canes awaited selection. Above it, a certificate, and then a single frosted window that looked out onto the quad, censoring the view that opened far enough so I could see grazes of cloud over blue and he could hear the conversations of teenage girls. 2 deflated rugby balls shared a shelf above his desk, stacked with more papers in manila folders, an empty photo frame, books about discipline and the minds of children. He had accused me of stealing exercise books and sent me to his office to await a caning at the end of class. I waited for the coming fright of the bell, wondering, would I be allowed to choose a cane from the wicker basket, or what had happened to the stolen books? There was the shape of his deformed pinky, the way it defied the other fingers of his hand. How difficult it must be to catch a rugby ball or steady a ballpoint. I cannot remember if he caned me. I do remember the cherry blush of his cheeks and fine deltas of veins like the petrified rivers of Mars that spread towards the shaved lines of his jaw. And how he put me in the A-team when I tackled Neil Parker. A husband and wife is next. A husband and wife wake in a time of sickness. Stephen's wife is a doctor, and she did an enormous amount of work with COVID patients, picked up COVID herself, suffered quite badly. A husband and wife wake in a time of sickness. Each day has become a decrepit dog curled towards the last gasps of comfort from a fireplace. A husband and wife wake. Their bed is warm with the mingled heat of themselves, but they have forgotten each other temporarily and fallen in love with a fear of the invisible. The world is bound by sickness. It offers them the asphalt reflections of empty streets and aimless hours stretched over love worn thin. Within the intimacies of routine, a great ocean has lost its tides and calm to a storm front. Faces have surrendered their noses and mouths but retained their eyes, dulled eyes, sketched over and over on countless reams of foolscap. From where my children stand. A son or a daughter thinks that when he or she falls in love, a ship sails over the edge of reason to an unmapped country under a sky of undiscovered constellations. This is what it is like to draft desire with the sharp pencil of youth and build a cabin of nostalgia against the hardening of time. Children imagine their parents were born dreaming with their backs turned to each other, and spend their days with their heads in folders of worry, balancing accounts into the black book of night. From where my children stand, the view is always brushed in lime and gold distance, where the water is aflame with light tongues of possibility. Years later, the wind returns, carrying darkness and mortality under its arms. I tug and test the slackened rigging of my body, run my fingers over the salt-brittled canvas of an earlier life, now emptied of the very same wind that carries my son and daughter towards possibility. Harbour-bound, I go about my business, searching for misplaced keys left in the car's ignition, or stand at the kitchen window, staring out, waiting for the microwave to ping. And this next and second last one is the title poem of this volume. It's one of his prose poems, which form part of all of his collections. Forgive me. I know today is the day of your funeral, but I cannot write for you, and I have forgotten how to offer a prayer for the dead. A soft wind has taken you impossibly far from here, so I write for the insignificance of an ant that is about to be burnt by a child with a magnifying glass. I write for the coming thirst of the rat and the inquisitive mouse with its back broken by a kitchen trap. I write for the flame-coloured vixen cornered by a dozen hounds, and for the top-heavy bear, the sheer weight of her hairiness swaying in anger, and the 4 cubs at her feet burned from their den by happy hunters. I write for the soaked lace wings of a dragonfly's drowning in a swimming pool, and the bee's last journey to the rose. I write for the gothic madness of a fly trapped behind the stained glass solitude of a cathedral, and I write for a stray cat walking in ever-slowing circles with an arrow through its neck. I write for the teat-heavy bitch being stoned by a trap of boys on a highway. I write for the concrete and straw lives of the lamb, the sow, and the cow awaiting the abattoir's bolt, and the fence-line lope of a lion tamed for the trophy room. I want to be a taxidermist for the soul of the earthworm, the caged finch, and flailing octopus in a fisherman's bait bucket. I want to display their lives from birth to death, from the nest until it is swept up by the ceaseless hurricane. I want to place the smallest of souls, of spiders, squirrels, and swallows, in glass and mahogany cabinets covered in children's fingerprints, in a museum of great sadness. I will use an antique typewriter to type the stories of their irrelevance on cardboard labels that tell of pain beyond our bodies. Later, I will step out into the inconsolable cold and offer a sigh instead of a prayer in that dark hall of night. I will walk towards a far-off door opening to a new day that is forever shifting out of reach and deeper into the murk. It's an extraordinary piece of work. It really, really is. And then finally, and it is the final poem in this collection, Stephen also has a great passion for surfing. So the final poem from Stephen, Love Poem for an Old Surfer. I have wasted so much of my life making love to a world of foam and force, a hex of false magic, offering rare perfection to my remaining days, until I too am made of fine threads of salted breath and brittle as a sun-dried horn of kelp.